Very good morning, students. Class 12D, this is our next theme. Theme 4 from the history part 1, thinkers, beliefs and buildings. This is our last theme from the part 1 history for class 12D. So, in this chapter we are going to study about the thinkers which are also, you can say we are talking about from 600 BCE to 600 BC, that who are the prominent thinkers in the society, not only in India but outside the India. What were the actual beliefs of these thinkers and what type of beliefs were, you can say, developing during 600 BC in India, and what is the prominent buildings which were constructed in India. Basically, when we say thinkers, so in this chapter we are going to study about the Lord Buddha as a thinker and the Mahavira, both teaching both, you can say, way of thinking regarding the society and their cultural policy they are going to describe here. Next is beliefs means that we are talking about that there are several community, how they believe on their existence, how they celebrate their cultural all the festivals, and what they think about their existence on earth. So here we are going to discuss the Buddhist, Jaina and the Brahmanical beliefs in this chapter when we say beliefs. Then buildings. When we say buildings, so in this chapter especially we are highlighting the Sanchi Stupa, and it is the main center point of this chapter in detail, that Sanchi Stupa is one of the oldest Buddhist stupa in Maharashtra at Bhopal. In 1989, Sanchi Stupa recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it is very important that United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization has ranked Sanchi Stupa as one of the World Heritage Site, and it is the proud that it located in India. Then who are the ruler who support its construction, because it has taken so many years. When we say Sanchi Stupa, so it involves so many monuments which are depicting the Buddhism culture and teaching in an artistic manner. So Ashoka, Kushan kings, Satvahana rulers and the kings of Gupta dynasty promoted and they also renovated the Buddhism and its learning wholeheartedly. Especially Satvahana rulers, Kushan kings and the Gupta dynasty kings, they renovated the Buddhism monuments and its teaching in a very artistic manner. Then little bit of Sanchi Stupa, that architecture. What type of architecture the Sanchi Stupa is usually having? It is a semi-spherical solid dome-like structure containing 3 relics of Buddha like hair, teeth and bones. Okay, so mainly that it is, when we talk about its architecture, it is a semi-spherical solid dome-like structure, and mainly it is depicting the Buddha like hair, teeth and bones. And then stupa, when we say Sanchi stupa means basically a dirt burial mound faced with stone. Then in detail, its structure is a hemispherical mound called anda. So at the top it is having the mound shape structure which is called anda, and a square railing called hermika, and a central pillar supporting a triple umbrella form called chhatra. So it is the all about its structure, anda, hermika and chhatra, a central pillar supporting a triple umbrella form, and it is called a chhatra. It is reflecting whole or completely the Buddhism artistic manner and its cultural beliefs. Dimensions, that what is its height? It is all about 54 feet in height and 120 feet dome a diameter. Okay, the stupa is a symbol of the Buddha and his enlightened mind and presence. The mount itself is said to represent the form of seated Buddha meditating and striving towards enlightenment. So Sanchi Stupa is a symbol of enlightenment of human being and their beliefs and the understanding the meaning of their existence on earth, as it is symbolizing the Buddhist culture. Then when we see the chapter, in 19th century, Europeans were very interested in the stupa at Sanchi. In fact, the French sought Shahjahan Begum's permission to take away the eastern gateway, which was the best preserved, to be displayed in a museum in France. And one more speciality, that it is having four entrance gates. This stupa was having four entrance gate in every four direction: north, east, west, south. Okay, and every entrance was so beautifully carved and inscribed by the craftsmen. So the French were so much excited to take away this gateway, one of the most eastern gateway, with them, so that they can preserve it and they can display it in the France museum. For a while, some Englishmen also wanted to do the same, but fortunately both the French and the English were satisfied with carefully prepared plaster cast copies, and the original remained at the site, part of the Bhopal estate. But Shahjahan Begum was not ready, and she only gave both of them the permission that they can having their plaster copy with them, but original will be remain in the Bhopal. The rulers of Bhopal, Shahjahan Begum and her successor, Sultan Jahan Begum, provided money for the preservation of the ancient site. No wonder then that John Marshall dedicated his important volumes on Sanchi to Sultan Jahan. She funded the museum that was built there, as well as the guest house where he lived, and wrote the volumes. She also founded the publication of the volume. So if the stupa complex has survived, it is in no small measure due to wise decision and to good luck in escaping the eyes of the railway contractor, builders, and those looking for finds to carry away to the Museum of Europe. One of the most important Buddhist center, the discovery of Sanchi has vastly transformed our understanding of early Buddhism. Today, it stands testimony of the successful restoration and preservation of a key archaeological site by Archaeological Survey of India. So you can see that how intelligently these Begum has tackled the situation, and they both were not ready to give the original gateways or any you can say Buddhist monuments to these French and Englishmen. That's why it becomes the, and now you can see that Sanchi is super recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we feel so proud that it belongs to India. Now, but what is the significance of this monument? Why was the mount built and what did it contain? Why is there a stone railing around it? Who built the complex or paid for its construction? When was it discovered? There is a fascinating story that we can uncover at Sanchi, for which we must combine information from text, sculpture, architecture, and inscriptions. Let us begin by exploring the background of the early Buddhist tradition. As I have told you that with the help of Sanchi Stupa, we are going to understand the education, learning, and concept behind the Buddhism or the Buddhist religious thinkers. So we are going to start this with the help of the background of the society from 600 to BC to 600 BC, sacrifices and debates, that what type of society was there during the existence and development of these all the scholars. The background of the early Buddhist traditions, sacrifices and debates. These era is also known, and these were the century which was known as the first millennium BC, and the first millennium BC is the year between 1000 BC to 1 BC. During this first millennium BC, all thinkers included Zarathustra belonged to Iran, Buddha from India, Mahavira, he was also from India, Kongzi from China, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. All the thinkers belong to Greece. So all these thinkers were involved during this first millennium BC. So study them becomes very important. That all these thinkers try to understand the mysteries of existence and relationship between human beings and cosmic order. That during this millennium period, the first millennium period, all these thinkers who belong to a different part of the world, when we talk about the Zarathustra and Buddha, Mahavira, Kongzi, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, all were wanted the main thing that after all, behind the existence of human and its cosmic order, cosmic order means the part of the space which lie outside the world. Okay, that it means after the death. Okay, all they want to know that what happened with us when we die, what is the meaning that we have taken the birth as a human being on the earth, what is the purpose of life. So they all were belonging to the philosopher and the thinkers of the society which were emerged during the first millennium BC, and their thirst is only to know about the mysteries of existence and relationship between human and cosmic order. So first of all, we are going to start it from the beginning of the Rig Vedic period, that the sacrificial tradition, that how the sacrifice is given to the society under the particular norms and religion. Early Vedic traditions, okay, as our civilization started from the Vedic period. So early Vedic tradition, which has been derived from the Rig Veda, it consists of, when we talk about the Rig Veda, it consists of the also of hymns in the praise of various deities, lords and goddesses, which mainly involve Agni, Indra and Soma. And they also involve this Vedic tradition from Rig Veda, they also involve sacrifices. There were two types of main sacrifices. One is Rajasuya and second is Ashwamedha. Both were performed by the chiefs and the kings as they were mentioned in the Rig Veda. So it becomes the custom that these two sacrifices should be performed by the chiefs and the kings of the kingdom. Without knowing what is the reason to do this sacrifice, what is the logic behind it, how fruitful they are in terms of the society survival, without knowing this fact, they all were bounded to follow these sacrifices. So first of all, I want to clear you what do you mean by Rasuya Yagya or Yajna, and second is Ashwamedha Yagya or Yajna. So students, Rajasuya Yagna or Rajasuya Yagya, both are similar, that it is the Yagya or Yagna when a king ascended the throne, the Purohit performed the Rajasuya Yagna to confer supreme power on him. The king was elevated to the position of God's representative on earth. So it was the ritual in the form of Yagya, which is known as Rajasuya Yagya, that when a king or ascended to the throne, so it has been celebrated, it has been worshipped through this Rajasuya Yagya by the Purohit, and it was the after this Yagya, it has assumed that now the king is the representative of God on earth. So whatever the king will be command, it should be followed or obeyed by the people at any cost. So this process is known as Rajasuya Yagya or Rajasuya Yagna. Second sacrifice which was involved in Rig Veda, the Ashwamedha Yagya, was a horse sacrifice ritual. Okay, here the horse was sacrificed by the king after a particular, you can say, particular set of thinking and event, that what they actually do with the horse. A horse accompanied by the king's warriors would be released to wander for a period of 1 year. That the horse king was accompanied by the king's warrior, and it was released. The horse was released to wander for one period wherever he wanted to go. Okay, the horse was free and it was released by the king's warrior to wander at least 1 year of period. So there will be nobody who will go to catch him back. Okay, it was a process under Ashwamedha Yagya. In the territory traversed by the horse, any rival could dispute the king's authority by challenging the warriors accompanying it. So, within 1 year, if the horse entered in any other kingdom's boundary and the king of that particular area wanted to fight with the kings whom this horse is belong to, so he can caught this horse and challenge the kings for the fight. And after 1 year, if no enemy had managed to kill and capture the horse, it means they wherever the horse was moving, the kingdom's ruler or kings assumed the king whose the horse is, whom the horse belonged to, they were ready to recognize the king that he is powerful. So they leave the horse freely. Then the horse, they didn't kill the horse. The animal would be guided back to the king's capital and they return back. They will guided the horse to their particular kings and the kingdom. It would be then sacrificed, and then in this case that particular horse should be sacrificed and the king would be declared as an undisputed sovereign, and the king will be declared as a undefeated most powerful ruler. Okay, so this yagna was known as the Ashwamedha. So in this way the horse has to be sacrificed, either killed by these other territorial kings, okay, or by the kings whom he belonged to. In both cases the innocent horse will be sacrificed, and they used to choose the very good and brave and healthy horse for Ashwamedha yagna. So these were the two basic sacrifices which involved in the Vedic period in India, when these thinkers were questioning about these yagna, that what were their importance and why they performed by the kings and the chiefs of kings. Now, after discussing it, that the new questions, many ideas found in the Upanishads show that people were curious about the meaning of life, the possibility of life after death, and rebirth. Was rebirth due to the past action? Such issues were hotly debated. Thinkers were concerned with understanding and expressing the nature of the ultimate reality, and others outside the Vedic tradition asked whether or not there even was a single ultimate reality. People also began speculating on the significance of the sacrificial tradition. Now, the people, not only these thinkers but the common people, also wanted to know what is the purpose behind all these sacrifices which were performing through one generation to another, and they became a inseparable part, or the you can say rituals of their life. Now, debates and discussion. We get a glimpse of lively discussion and debates from Buddhist texts, which mention as many as 64 sects or schools of thought. Teachers traveled from place to place, trying to convince one another as well as lay persons about the validity of their philosophy or the way they understood the world. Now, the Buddhist monks and the teacher go one place to another, okay, and they, by their oral teaching, they want to educate the people that they have to be enough intelligent that they know what is the meaning of life and what is the purpose of their life. Now, debate took place in the Kutagshala, literally a hut with a pointed roof, or in groves where traveling mendicants halted. If a philosopher succeeded in convincing one of his rivals, the followers of the latter also became his disciples. So, support for any particular sect could grow and shrink over time. Now, many of these teachers, including Mahavira and Buddha, questioned the authority of the Vedas. They also emphasized individual agency, suggesting that men and women could strive to attain liberation from the trials and tribulation of worldly existence. This was in marked contrast to Brahmanical position, wherein, as we have seen, an individual existence was thought to be determined by his or her birth in a specific caste or gender. So there is a contrast between Mahavira and Lord Buddha's teaching with the Brahmanical point of view. As we have studied in the Dharma Shastra, that according to the Brahmanical point of view and their way of thinking, that people are recognized that they are elite, they are good, they should belong to the good work or the study on the basis of their caste, gender, and on their accidental birth. So they are totally, now these thinkers are having the contrasting way of thinking with the Brahmanical point of thinking. Okay, then how Buddhist text prepared and preserved. It is important that the Buddha and the other teachers taught orally through discussion and debate. Men and women, perhaps maybe children were also involved, attended these discourses and discussed what they had heard. None of the Buddha's speeches were written down during his lifetime. After his death, 5th to 4th century BC, his teachings were compiled by his disciples at a council of elders or seniors, monks at Vaishali, Pali for Vaishali in present-day Bihar. These compilations were known as Tipitaka, literally 3 baskets to hold different types of text. They were first transmitted orally and then written in classified according to length as well as subject matter. The Vinaya Pitaka includes rules and regulations for those who joined the Sangha or monastic order. The Buddha's teachings were included in the Sut Pitaka, and the Abhidharma Pitaka dealt with the philosophical matters. Each Pitaka comprised a number of individual texts. Later, commentaries were written on these texts by Buddhist scholars. As Buddhists traveled to new regions such as Sri Lanka, other texts such as the Deepamsa, literally the chronicle of the island, and the Mahavamsa, the great chronicle, were written containing regional histories of Buddhism. Many of these works contain biographies of Buddha. Some of the oldest texts are in Pali, while later compositions are in Sanskrit. When Buddhism spread to East Asia, pilgrims such as Faxian and Xuanzang traveled all the way from China to India in search of the text. These they took back to their own country, where they were translated by scholars. Indian Buddhist teachers also traveled to faraway places, carrying texts to disseminate the teaching of Buddha. Buddhist texts were preserved in the manuscripts for several centuries in monasteries in different parts of Asia. Modern translations have been prepared from Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, and Tibetan texts. So, students, this is how the Buddha and his disciple tried to think beyond the common or the mediocre type of thinkers, that what is the best for the sake of humanity and the society, which will be fit and which will be suitable for every sect survival and their freedom. So till then we will completed this, and next video I will continue the more content. Till then, take care and best of luck.